The Constitution gives Congress the sole power to declare war. So how is it that the last formally declared war was the Second World War? In his new book, The Road to War, former CBS chief diplomatic correspondent Marvin Kalb says presidents make personal and private commitments to countries, which can often lead to a war without a formal declaration. And Marvin Kalb is here. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
You know, I started reading this book, I was thinking, yeah, what about that?
What about that?
We haven't had a formal declaration of war, and yet we've probably had 7 wars, or 6 anyway. I mean, we're at war twice right now.
We continue to be at war since World War II.
Yeah.
The last time there was a declaration of war. It seems as if we've been in a nonstop war, but there hasn't been a single declaration of war, principally because the Congress on issues of war has simply abrogated its responsibilities. The Congress, as you said, is supposed to declare war. It has control over funding of all military operations. They continue to give money, but they don't give money as a political decision that this is a good war or a bad war. The net effect, then, is that the president is left with the responsibility to declare war. And he has been doing this nonstop. And quickly, I must say, it's not a Democratic thing or a Republican.
No, all the presidents have done it.
All of the presidents have been doing it over the last 30, 40 years. The presidents now, like the old European monarchs, they have their own army because we have an all-volunteer force, 0.6% in the military, defending 99.4%. It's an amazing statistic. So the president has his private army. The Congress does nothing as a check against his power. So what you do when you examine all of this is you find an awesome responsibility for war and peace in the hands of one person with nobody there to say, wait a minute, this is wrong. The media, for example, once a proud member of, I don't want to say that they sort of caved, but they are not standing up and providing any big check.
They did in Iraq. There was I think that was the last time the media did any. Although a lot of bought onto the weapons of mass destruction,
right.
But there was. Hold on a second here, but nothing ever really happened about it because we really declared war there, but there was, you know.
Yeah, but Emily, nothing like war as a good story. So in other words, if you want to go up as an institution and say, hey, Mr. President, this is no good, you're going against your own interests. War is a great story, and so the media goes along with the coverage of the war. It is not as good a story to blow a whistle and say, Mr. President, it wasn't a good idea to send troops into Iraq. Right now, this president, truly, Obama, in my opinion, does anguish about the idea of war, and yet he adopted the war in Afghanistan. It's now his. We're on the threshold of an intrusion into Syria and its big-time operation against Iran and nuclear weapons if the president decides to go there. So even though he doesn't want to move toward war, rejects warlike efforts, he is drawn in that direction nonetheless. Mm-hmm. And so you end up with us constantly on the road to war.
Yeah, you sort of laid the groundwork for this back in the Truman era, where he laid the groundwork for the war in Korea. I mean, by kind of, you know, what was it, the Marshall Plan, and the other one, I'm blanking on the resolution. But he basically, by making deals with countries, laid the groundwork for something that became a full-fledged war.
That's a terrific point, I believe. In 1945, when Harry Truman took over, he promised the Congress, he called in the leadership, and he said, if I ever send troops to fight, you have my word as president. I will never do it unless I've cleared it with the Congress. So in June of 1950, when the North Koreans attacked South Korea, the president goes where to get his authority? The UN Security Council. He never absorbed Congress in the decision at all, and it came back to haunt him later on because the Republicans went after him saying, you should have come to us. It didn't go well. You didn't win in Korea.
And what about Vietnam? How did we stumble into that? Because the same thing happened. I mean, there were deals being made, and
it's the same
Gulf of
idea.
Tonkin resolution and all that.
This was all a series of presidents: Truman, then Eisenhower, then Kennedy, then Johnson, and it took, by the way, Nixon to make the key decision to pull out of Vietnam. But each one of the earlier presidents stepped in a little bit at a time, with Congress never opening its mouth, the media in almost lockstep. And at that time, we had a draft.
I remember.
And the parents, when the Vietnam War got really ugly in the late 60s, the parents stood up and in effect said, in demonstrations all over the country, enough, enough. We can't do this anymore. And Lyndon Johnson pulled out. Right now, there are no demonstrations on campus. There are no demonstrations in Washington on the Mall. It's a beautiful, quiet, green place right now. And yet, we're in a couple of wars, and we're on the verge of others.
Well, you read an op-ed a couple of weeks ago, which was interesting, and I didn't know the background on the mutual defense treaties. You were proposing one with Israel. I mean, I should know more about it than I did, but it's been proposed. We've been on the verge of this thing probably 10 times, maybe more, and it's never happened, which would mean, really, they couldn't do it unilaterally. Well,
you couldn't do it unilaterally. You have to have both sides do a defense treaty, but in my judgment, there are two issues here.
I meant they couldn't go to war unilaterally.
Yeah. In two issues here. The Israelis want and deserve to have security. The Palestinians want and deserve to have a state of their own. You can't make the deal unless both sides are satisfied. You can provide a state, but how do you provide the security? The United States is the only country in the world that could do that with and to the Israelis. And in my judgment, anyway, this is something that, if it happened, it would ease the Israeli mind to be able to move forward. And somebody like Prime Minister Netanyahu is always talking about security. This is a way of reaching out and satisfying that.
Why don't they do it?
They don't do it because the Israelis say, we don't want to lean on the Americans. We want to be absolutely independent and capable of doing our own thing. And the American side is saying quietly, you don't talk about this publicly, but quietly what they're saying is, we don't want to absorb the problems that the Israelis have with the Arabs. And there's always oil. So these things are floating around, but they've always floated around. The important thing, I think, right now is to take the step that could really move the process forward.
Do you think there's going to be a move into Syria on the part of
I think the president doesn't want to, but is almost obliged to. He spoke about red lines. He rhetorically got himself into a mess. And now he's going to have to live up to what it is that he has, in effect, said to the entire world. You cross a red line, you use chemical weapons. We now know they've used chemical weapons. So at this particular point, the president, if he does not act, looks like a wimp. A wimp.
Yeah. Well, fascinating, Marvin Kalb. As always, the road to war. How come we don't have any war resolutions? Never thought about it until I read that. All right, thanks so much for coming.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure. All right, and that is it for Greater Boston. On tomorrow's show, Lieutenant Governor Tim Murray is leaving his post, but leaves many questions unanswered. He'll be here. Plus, Matthew Morrison from Fox Network's wildly popular Glee is in town. And socially conscious shopping. Do you care where your clothes are made? That's all tomorrow at 7. I'm Emily Rooney. Thanks for watching.